A team of United Nations weapons inspectors is in Syria this morning. It has orders to find and destroy the government's chemical weapons. Our CBS News team that's been reporting from Syria is here this morning. Elizabeth Palmer was the only American network correspondent in the country at the height of last month's crisis. She was just nominated for an Emmy for her work. Clarissa Ward won 2 Emmys last night for reporting from Syria. Joining us again is former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, a CBS News contributor. Good morning to all of you.
Good morning.
This is good to have you here.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Clarissa, let me start with you. These developments, how are they playing out on the rebel side, especially within the push and pull among different parts of the rebel opposition?
Well, I think the rebels are highly skeptical about these developments, while the rest of the international community is very excited about the momentum with this chemical weapons resolution. The rebels and a lot of people who speak for the opposition see the chemical weapons as essentially a distraction and a sideshow. And what they want to see is the international community really taking action to try to dismantle the conventional weapons that are have killed over 100,000 people in Syria.
Elizabeth, what's the challenge for the inspectors that are in there now?
It looks as if they've got a pretty good list of what is supposed to be in the stock, so they'll physically go into the storage spaces and the research spaces and the manufacturing spaces and check off what needs to be taken and destroyed. It's the getting into those places that's going to be difficult. At least 2 of them are in active hot zones, and there's no indication, as Clarissa said, that the rebels are going to say, we'll give you safe passage, come on in. So it's going to be very dangerous.
Is there any understanding or belief that they can somehow move them somewhere that will not be either destroyed or detected?
I think it's always a risk, but we have to remember that Russian credibility is on the line. Russia has the whip hand, and I think the Russians are going to do everything they can to make sure that this happens.
And let's talk about the Russian credibility with you, Secretary Rice. Were you surprised that this agreement to give up the chemical weapons came so quickly, apparently after off-the-cuff remarks? Were they off-the-cuff remarks?
I've spent a lot of time with Vladimir Putin.
Yeah.
He understands his interest very, very well. He saw an opening to displace the United States as the primary factor in this conflict. He saw an opening to secure Russia's re-entry into the Middle East in a way that they had not been since Henry Kissinger negotiated them out in 1973. And he is interested in Russia, not in Assad, not in the Syria situation, but in Russia. And give him credit, he's done a fantastic job of making Russia the center of this story.
Was there a danger for the U.S. then, given that?
Well, I think the problem for the U.S. is that while on the issue of chemical weapons, our interests with the Russians are definitely coincident, we also want to see the chemical weapons dismantled. When it comes to the outcome of the civil war in Syria, our interests and the Russian interests are not the same. Their interests are in stabilizing the Assad regime and then getting an outcome that is in their direction. Their interests do not, for instance, are not concerned with the fact that the Iranians are a dominant factor in this. We have 30,000 or so Iranian fighters inside Syria. We have some common interests around not having al-Qaeda be a major presence in Syria. But we have to be careful because the Russians have done a very good job in securing their interests. I'm not quite certain that we have defined how we're going to secure our interests.
Well, also, I don't think we've been as clear about what our interests are here. Our policy, we seem to say one thing and then kind of do another, and then say one thing and then kind of do another. We're going to arm the rebels. 3 months later, I'm standing in the weapons warehouse with the rebels who we're apparently arming, and they don't have bupkis.
Yeah.
So.
And also, to take up your point, I think that this is a very elegant piece of diplomacy. It was a very Russian piece of diplomacy. It's maybe net good for humanity, but in the end, Syria is giving away chemical weapons it was using minimally, if at all, and they haven't given away any of the main tools they're using to wage this war.
That's absolutely right, and if I could just... the rebels that are not being armed are the rebels that are most likely to protect our interests. The people who are being armed are extremists. The Assad regime is using the horrors of conventional weapons against its own people. And so when you look at the situation on the ground and you say, if you now go to diplomacy, diplomacy is going to reflect what's going on the ground. And who's in the weakest position on the ground? The rebels that are most coincident with our
So
interests.
will history look back and say it was a grievous mistake for the United States not to have supported the rebels and found a way to get weapons to them?
Well, I was in favor of supporting the rebels of the Free Syrian Army 18 months ago or 2 years ago.
And you were
then
sure that they could find a way to get weapons to them?
I think then you had a chance to support non-extremist elements. When people say, well, there are huge numbers of extremists now among them, yes. And there were fewer a year ago, and there are going to be more a year from now. And so I think not acting here was a mistake.